An R01 resubmission, one of the things that I want you to think about is what is going to get in your way? What's going to prevent you from being successful? That's what we're talking about today. If you're new around here, my name is Sarah Dobson. I am a research grant consultant, and my team and I help early career researchers get funded at NIH. So I wanted to talk about this today in terms of the actual grant writing process rather than the obstacles that get in your way on the review side of things. We've talked about that before elsewhere, but I wanted to take this in a bit of a different direction today because I have observed in the years that I've been doing this some common tendencies, let's say some self-sabotaging, let me try that word again, self-sabotaging behavior that I've noticed that can really prevent you from being successful that I think is very easily avoidable. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. So number one is the number one obstacle that I wanted to talk about first is your own worry or anxiety. And I know that's probably not where you thought that I was going to start with this, but I see this from applicants all the time who, you get your score back and naturally you're worried about it. It's clear that you didn't get a fundable score or the grant wasn't even discussed. And that just generates a whole bunch of worry, which is completely understandable, right? But what I want you to avoid is letting that worry, that anxiety dictate your decisions, because that ends up getting you into a whole lot of trouble. For example, in rushing your resubmission, which we're going to talk about, but also in terms of how you respond to the critiques in your summary statement, you can end up cobbling together a sort of Frankenstein resubmission that is trying to please all of these reviewers without really thinking about what is right for the project that you're proposing and where you are headed as a scientist. So your own worry, if you let that drive your decision making, can end up hurting you and getting you into more trouble and actually making it more difficult for you to get funded ultimately. So I don't want to diminish how real that anxiety is, but I do want you to pay attention to how it influences your decision making. Because if all you did was stop and ask yourself, am I resubmitting this next cycle because I'm worried or because I know that I'll be ready? Even just asking yourself that can be a career-changing decision. Okay, so let's talk about obstacle number 2, which is rushing your resubmission. And what I mean by that is just you're sort of automatically planning to submit in the next cycle, come hell or high water, without really making a plan and figuring out how long it's going to take for you to do a good job, right? The automatic assumption is we just have to submit this next cycle. We've got to keep the momentum going. I don't want to delay this because that will just delay, the funding ultimately. But what I want you to consider is that by rushing, you might actually be delaying your funding instead of the other way around, right? So if you're focusing on truly improving the grant, sometimes that might take a little bit longer. And the time and effort it takes to do that ends up paying off in the long run rather than in the short term. So I think part of this too is just the culture around resubmissions. There's this idea that you just keep the ball rolling, right? You just you get your results and you turn it around as quickly as you can to just kind of keep your hat in the ring. But I've seen it so many times that it actually ends up harming your chances rather than improving them. So really just think about that. And I will say, I can tell you our most successful clients, the ones who get fundable scores and the ones who get perfect scores, are actually the ones who wait. They skip a cycle. They look very closely at how they're going to address each and every critique, whether that's in terms of, generating more data or publishing a few more articles in peer-reviewed journals, or whether it's just thinking about how they can better justify their own decisions. All of that will help them write a stronger resubmission. And we see that in the results that they get. So they are not automatically just resubmitting for the next cycle. They're really taking time to think about and plan what a strong resubmission actually looks like. And of course, that takes time. And so I just really encourage you to consider whether you are rushing. And again, based on obstacle number one, are you rushing because of that worry about funding, or are you planning this out in a way that is going to serve your project in the best way? And so that brings us to obstacle number three, which is not creating and following a plan, right? So all of these, of course, are tied together. So this one, of course, also comes down to not having enough time to do a good job, but it's more specifically about not protecting your time in an intentional way. So if you don't create a plan, you don't actually know how long it's going to take for you to address your comments from your reviewers. And often, you might have a loose plan, which is, let's plan to submit in February. But until you actually sort of bring that down to earth and make it concrete, it doesn't really mean anything. If you don't lay out the details in terms of how you're going to accomplish that, that's when you get into trouble. Because if you don't actually try to fit a plan into your current schedule, you won't know how realistic or unrealistic your timing actually is. And that means that there's a greater chance that you'll discover really late in the game that you don't have enough time to do a good job, right? It's impossible to get everything done in time to address all of those critiques. But because you're so committed to submitting to that particular deadline, you just throw it in anyway. And that's what leads to a not so great resubmission score, and then you're back at square one, right? So what I'm really encouraging you to do here is to pause, take a deep breath, assess the situation, assess the information that you have available to you, right? Assess what you're seeing in your summary statement, and then sit down and actually make a plan. How am I going to do this? How much time am I estimating that it's going to take me? And is it actually realistic for me to resubmit for the next cycle? Or do I need to give it a few extra months to do a really good job? Because those few months that you take to do a really good job can actually save you potentially years in that resubmission cycle. Instead of going through this treadmill where you're just rushing and resubmitting every time and not really learning anything from the summary statements you get, by just taking the time to pause and create a plan and figure out how you're going to address the reviewer comments and improve your grantsmanship at the same time, doing that can ultimately shorten the time that it takes you to get a funded grant. So that is it for today. If you found this helpful, I strongly encourage you to sign up for our resource library. Inside the resource library, you'll find lots of tools and tutorials to help you write a stronger NIH grant. So that is it for this week. I will see you next time.